Our story begins with a question. What if business was never about chasing money first? What if the true start of any venture was meaning? I will tell you a story of risk, of faith, of tension, a story where cash felt like water, and meaning felt like the only lighthouse that could guide them home. Every founder begins with a spark, but sparks are fragile. They vanish in wind or grow into fire. This story belongs to one spark that refused to die. It is not about cities you know or names you've heard. It is about choices, hard choices, the kind that test who we are when no one is watching. Listen closely. Between these stories are lessons that will outlive the story itself. So let us begin. The weave is waiting to be tied. The lighthouse is waiting to be lit. And the journey is about to start.
Andrew sat in a small room with peeling paint on the walls. The desk was borrowed. The chair wobbled. Yet on that desk was an idea. It wasn't written on paper. Not yet. It was a thought that refused to leave. An itch in the back of his mind. A whisper saying, "Try me." Andrew wasn't chasing wealth. Not tonight. He was chasing something harder to name. Something that felt like meaning. The world told him, write a mission statement. But his heart answered with something shorter. A mantra. A line he could carry anywhere. His mantra was simple. Make people stronger. 4 words. Nothing fancy, but strong enough to guide him when doubt crept in. Still, sparks are fragile. Sparks burn bright for a moment, then fade. He knew he had to guard this one. So he opened a notebook, drew a shaky line, and began to sketch. The product was not clear, but the purpose was. He imagined people using it. He imagined the smile on their faces when it worked. That vision kept him awake. Doubt sat beside him. Fear whispered louder than hope. But Andrew leaned closer to his spark, refusing to let it die. And so the story began. One room, one mantra, one fragile spark against the darkness. Andrew could not build alone. A single thread breaks. But when threads come together, they form a weave. He reached out to Covey, a friend who could shape raw ideas into working code. Covey said yes, but only if the vision was real. Next came Smith, who had the gift of speaking to people. Where Andrew saw ideas, Smith saw customers. 3 voices, 3 strengths, none complete alone. Together, they formed something fragile but alive. They sat around a kitchen table. No polished office. No glass walls. Just laptops, coffee mugs, and restless energy. Arguments came quickly. Andrew chased meaning. Covey chased precision. Smith chased sales. The room sparked with friction. But in that clash was power. Their differences forced clarity. Each weakness was mirrored by another's strength. Andrew called their work the weave. It was more than a plan. It was the pattern that kept them tied together. At night, he looked at their notes. Messy sketches. Bold promises. Still, the weave held. And in that fragile weave, the first shape of a company began to appear. The team had ideas, but ideas alone could not feed them. Ideas were air, and air was not enough. They needed something real in their hands. Andrew called it their first draft. Covey called it code on crutches. Smith insisted on calling it a product, because people don't buy drafts. The thing was clumsy. Buttons didn't work. Colors screamed like bad paint. But even broken, it was alive, and that mattered. They carried it to their first customer, a small shop owner named Troll. He leaned forward, curious but cautious. First customers are never easy. The screen froze on his first click. Covey's jaw tightened. Andrew felt his heart slam. Failure always shows up uninvited. Troll leaned back in silence. Then he said slowly, "It's not perfect, but it helps me. Don't stop." And the room exhaled. That single sentence was more than money in the bank. It was faith on credit. Business begins when one person says yes. Andrew wrote down a new line in his notebook. Ship fast. Learn faster. Mistakes could teach faster than theories. Every great company begins this way. Not with perfection, but with permission to keep going. Faith is the fuel when facts are scarce. The spark they guarded was no longer just theirs. Someone else saw the light, and that made it real. Smith believed the product was alive, but belief alone couldn't pay the bills. A business without customers is only a hobby. The first sale would prove they were real. Andrew dreaded sales. He loved meaning, not persuasion. But Smith said, if you can't sell it, you can't serve anyone. They prepared for their first pitch. No big stage, no spotlight. Just a cramped office, one skeptical buyer, and their fragile product. The buyer was Gibbs, a mid-level manager. He had seen pitches before and forgotten most of them. Skepticism hung on his face like armor. Smith spoke with energy. He painted pictures of problems solved and lives improved. But Gibbs folded his arms tighter, unconvinced. Then Andrew stepped in. He didn't talk about features. He told Gibbs the mantra, make people stronger. The room went quiet. Gibbs leaned forward, curious despite himself. Stories change minds faster than numbers. After a long pause, Gibbs nodded. He said, I'll try it. Just one unit. That single yes cracked open the future. It wasn't about revenue. It was about proof. One customer was worth more than 1,000 compliments. And that day, Andrew learned a truth. The hardest yes is the first. Every sale after it stands on that foundation. The first sale gave them proof, but proof wasn't a paycheck. Revenue trickled in like drops of water on dry ground. They needed a model that could last. Smith wanted subscriptions. Predictable money, month after month. Stability builds trust, he argued. Covey shook his head. He pushed for one-time licenses. Cash up front keeps us alive. Tomorrow is never promised. Andrew listened, torn between them. A business is more than code and more than sales. The model decides destiny. The kitchen table became a battlefield. Charts drawn on napkins. Numbers shouted louder than reason. Smith pointed at growth curves. He said, investors love recurring streams. Covey fired back, but streams dry before rivers form. Andrew thought of Troll, their first customer. Would he pay forever, or just once? A model without customers is theory, not truth. The debate stretched late into the night. Coffee went cold. The weave strained but did not break. At last, Andrew raised his voice. Read us both. The market will choose, not us. Silence filled the room, and then reluctant nods. In that moment, they learned a hard truth. Strategy is not about being right. It's about being willing to test. Growth came faster than expected. Orders trickled into streams. But streams also carried pressure. Smith celebrated every new customer. He wanted to chase scale, even if the foundation shook. Momentum is our advantage, he said. Covey pushed back hard. Bugs piled up, deadlines slipped, quality dropped. We can't sprint on broken legs, he warned. Andrew stood between them, pulled like a rope in a storm. Leadership often feels less like steering and more like holding people together. The weave began to fray. Arguments grew louder. Meetings ended with slammed doors. Even the kitchen table felt hostile. Smith accused Covey of slowing them down. Covey accused Smith of selling promises they couldn't keep. Both were right and both were blind. Andrew wrote in his notebook, not all traction is progress. The company can move fast and still move in circles. Tension spilled into their work. Emails short and sharp. Silence longer than collaboration. The weave trembled at its seams. Late one night, Andrew whispered to himself, a team is fragile. Trust is the thread we cannot afford to lose. He knew something had to change. And in that silence, the spark they once guarded felt dangerously close to burning out. The team needed more than faith. Growth was outpacing their savings, and every new customer demanded more. Money became the gate they had to pass through. Smith polished the pitch deck for weeks. He filled it with graphs, buzzwords, and glowing forecasts. This will impress, he said with pride. Covey frowned at the slides. Too many promises. Too little proof. He believed investors respected honesty more than glitter. Andrew felt the weight of both sides. Investors wanted hope, but hope without substance was a lie. The weave of trust had to hold. They entered the investor's office, a sleek room of glass and steel. Gibbs sat across the table, sharper and colder than before. The crucible had arrived. Smith launched into his pitch with energy. He talked of markets, disruption, and scale. Gibbs' face stayed stone still. Covey interrupted with raw numbers. He showed bugs, churn, and unfinished code. It was brutal, but it was real. The room went silent. Gibbs tapped his pen, eyes fixed on Andrew. In that moment, the future rested on one voice. Andrew leaned forward and spoke simply. "We don't have it all, but we have meaning and customers who believe in us." And that truth, stripped of glitter, broke through. Gibbs nodded once. The gate did not open wide, but it opened just enough. The money helped them grow, but growth is a double-edged blade. More customers meant more demands. The cracks in the weave widened. Bugs multiplied faster than fixes. Support emails piled high. Each new complaint felt heavier than the last. Smith kept chasing sales. "Revenue will solve it," he said. "But revenue without reliability is a fire fed by paper." Covey warned, "We're scaling broken code." His words carried truth, but truth was drowned out by urgency. The clock ticked louder each day. Andrew felt trapped. He saw the product struggling, the team fraying, and the cash burning. Leadership is hardest when both choices are painful. Then the storm hit. A major client canceled. News spread fast, and faith in the company shook. Investors grew restless. Calls turned colder, questions sharper. Money that once flowed now trickled into silence. The team stared at numbers that only fell. Layoffs whispered like ghosts in the room. Scarcity revealed their fear. Andrew wrote again in his notebook, "Scarcity sharpens purpose." In storms, a business must remember why it exists. And as night fell, he knew a choice was near. Cut deep or reinvent. The downturn demanded an answer. The downturn left the team shaken. Sales collapsed, trust wavered, and silence filled their days. It felt like the spark had almost died. Smith pressed for shortcuts. "We need to pivot fast," he urged. But shortcuts cut deeper when the foundation is weak. Covey argued for retreat. "Shrink to survive," he said. But survival without purpose is just waiting to fail. Andrew searched for an anchor. His notebook opened again, pages worn thin. At the top he wrote, "Meaning before money." One night he walked past the harbor. The sea was wild, waves crashing against the shore. A lighthouse stood firm, casting its beam into the storm. He stopped and whispered, "That's us. We hold light even if waves surround us." Symbols remind leaders when courage runs low. The next morning he gathered Smith and Covey. No shortcuts. No retreat. We return to our mantra. We make people stronger. The words cut through the fog. They remembered why they started. The weave tightened again. Customers felt the difference. Their renewed focus spread like warmth. Hope, once fragile, began to flicker back to life. The storm had not passed. But with the lighthouse lit, they could steer again. Direction mattered more than speed. The storm calmed, but new tests arrived. Success drew attention from bigger players. A tempting offer soon landed on their table. A powerful company wanted to buy them out. The sum was large enough to erase every worry. Smith's eyes lit with possibility. Covey frowned. "If we sell, our vision dies here." He feared becoming a footnote, another startup swallowed and forgotten. Andrew felt the weight of choice. To sell was safety. To stay was risk. Leadership is often a battle between comfort and courage. They gathered in silence around the table. The papers sat untouched. Every signature would rewrite their lives. Smith argued for security. "We've worked too hard to gamble." Covey answered, "We didn't start this to cash out. We started to make people stronger." Andrew opened his notebook again. At the bottom of the page he wrote one word: endure. A company's worth is proven not by exit, but by endurance. He raised his head. "We stay independent. We keep building. We honor the meaning." The words carried both risk and freedom. The team exhaled, slowly. The papers remained unsigned. Their path would be harder, but it would be theirs. And so the weave held, fragile yet unbroken. A lighthouse shining still, elegant under pressure.